Greetings YouTube, this is Gaisowiros, and on today's video, a topic that's a little peculiar. The first Dark Souls is one of my favorite games of all time, and as I am very into comparative mythology, I have decided to use both my knowledge of Dark Souls and of comparative mythology to make a video about both things, as we can reconstruct the Proto-Indo-European language from its descendants today. We can also compare different Indo-European mythologies and see if there is a unique structure to Indo-European religions. To do this, we can compare the different deities and their iconography and roles and see what they have in common. This is an example of a comparison table that we get from comparing Roman, Norse, Vedic and Gaulish deities. The deities are separated into three classes: the ruling class, the fighting class and the producing class. If you do not understand this table, I think the following examples and especially the comparison with Dark Souls deities will help you understand. I have added two other archetypes that aren't part of the Indo-European mythos per se, but are archetypes that are found in religions all over the world. The first class of deities that we will study is the white gods of ruling. They are associated with the color white as a symbol of purity, intellect, and religious enlightenment. There are two subtypes to this archetype. The first one, the god of oaths. This archetype is represented here by Mitra on the bottom left and Lugus on the top right. The etymology of Mitra comes from two parts, me and tra. Together they mean causes binding, and Lugus comes from lur, which means swear an oath. In this context, we can infer from the combination of binding and oaths that these gods are the founders of laws and the origin between the relationship between gods and mankind. The other archetype, which is not exclusive to the first one, is the Sky Father god. A good example of this god is Jupiter. The etymology of Jupiter comes from Indo-European Deus Pter, which means bright father. The etymology of the Norse god Tyr comes from a related Indo-European root, Diaus, which means the sunlit sky. His name is related to Zeus in Greek and Dies in Latin, which means day. Even though his characteristics as a Norse god are very different from the Greek god Zeus, the white gods of ruling are opposed to the dark gods of ruling. These are gods of sorcery and what we can call black magic. Their names have various etymologies. They are gods of intelligent madness, who are revered but also feared by mortals, which might explain the various etymologies if there was a name taboo on these gods. As such, they are the other side of the same coin as a god of ruling, but working in the shadows instead of the light. They can also be of a different race, like Varuna of the Vedic tradition. Varuna is an Asura, a race defeated but still part of the whole Hindu and Vedic pantheon. He is shown here on the top left, but he is the only god on this slide to be of another race. I think this is an example of the white god using his powers of binding and oaths and law to bring order and bring the two races together. This brings me to my first example coming from Dark Souls, Gwyn, the Lord of Sunlight. Gwyn is a ruling god, as he rules over lords and Lordran. But ruling gods aren't always the head of the pantheon, they are just gods of law and order and oaths. His name also means white in Welsh, and he is white of hair, which adds up to his iconography as a white god of ruling. Gwyn also wields a thunderbolt, which is unique amongst white gods of ruling. Only Zeus and Jupiter have this iconography. Gwyn also defeats an ancient race of beings, just like Odin versus the giants and Vanir, and Zeus versus the Titans. He is the one who bequeaths the souls and arranges the peace, just as a god of oaths and binding would. He knows that the end is coming and sacrifices himself, which is a trait also shared with Odin and his fear of Ragnarok. However, as with the example with the giants and Vanir, Odin is not a white god of ruling, but it's an interesting similarity. The dark god of ruling in Dark Souls would be Seath the Scaleless. He is a defeated god of another race and granted lordship by the Father God. He is an expert of sorcery and magic, which is very similar to the Norse concept of Scyther, which is a type of magic that Odin uses. Sorcery is available to humans, but not granted by the god readily. This is very similar to runic magic and also organ magic from Irish mythology. These two types of magic use the power of words to make sorcery. Soul's magic is often thought to be related to the moon being the opposite of the sun is like the dark gods being the opposite of the white gods. Seath is skillless and was rejected by the other dragons. As an ugly god who is feared and isolated, he has a lot in common with Varuna and Ogmios. The other category is the god of fighting. He is associated with the color red and often has red hair. He is a god who fights with great physical might. This physical strength can be natural or it can be given by an artifact or another god. But most often he is a benevolent god who is a protector of mankind. Even if he reacts bluntly and boldly, he protects the fields and destroys monsters. He most often wields the power of thunder and lightning, as they are very strong natural phenomena. This power of thunder and lightning often comes from a percussive weapon. It is with this weapon that he defeats the serpent or the dragon. Even though he is only a god of fighting, he sometimes is also the ruler of the sky and even the pantheon. Being the ruler of the sky doesn't mean he rules over gods or men, but he moves the clouds and makes the rainfall and controls the wind, so he is also very important to mankind. In Dark Souls, there is a mysterious god who is only called the God of War. We know his existence from item descriptions, but he does not take an active part during the events of Dark Souls 1. We can see one of his statues at the Sunlight Altar, meaning he is revered by the adherents of sunlight. As members of the Covenant of Sunlight are benevolent in nature, maybe the God of War is also a benevolent god. There are many pieces of evidence that the God of War is the son of Gwyn, who was banished from Arno Londo. We can see from this statue that he fights with a spear, and the lightning spear is a recurrent theme in Dark Souls as a spell. He was banished from Arno Londo for reasons unknown, maybe because he reacted too bluntly to something. There's also another theory that the Nameless King, a boss in Dark Souls 3, is that God of War and Gwyn's firstborn. He remains unnamed like the God of War, but he is allied with the dragons, which is a difference from the usual gods of fighting that we see. At least in Indo-European tradition, he rides the sky on an animal and he has a weapon of lightning and thunder, which is a lightning spear, just like the God of War. Indo-European fighting gods such as Taranis and Indra also ride the sky on an animal and they have weapons of lightning and thunder, but the spear will be pretty unusual for Indo-European tradition. Next, the Trickster Deity. He is an intelligent and charismatic inventor deity. Most often, he is also a psychopomp, meaning he brings the souls of dead people to the underworld. He is often associated with fire, which makes him a god of ritual and sacrifice. In Indo-European tradition, fire is an essential part of sacrificing to the gods. Sometimes he is also a god of two genders and metamorphosis. For example, the coupling of Hermes and Aphrodite resulted in a being called Hermaphroditus, who is part male and part female. Loki also changed himself into a mare to distract a giant, and this action resulted in the being called Sleipnir, which is an 8-legged horse that Odin rides into battle. Most often, the Trickster Deities are punished by the other gods for their creations and deeds. Examples include Mercury and his lyre, Loki and Fenrir, and Prometheus and fire. The best example of a Trickster Deity in Dark Souls 1 comes from the Witch of Izalith. She invents fire magic, which is a type of magic available to most humans, but she attempts to recreate the first flame and that creates demons. This magic transforms her into the bed of chaos, and she is thus punished and bound for her mistakes. However, her magic has many followers, being given to mankind, and it lives on without her. She and her demons were attacked by Gwyn and his knights, but the demonic army couldn't be defeated. It is possible she invented the rite of kindling, and her feminine nature also brings her closer to Loki and Hermes. Then come the many gods of producing. They are either natural fertility or craftsmanship deities. They either create divine life or they create divine objects. If the fertility deities are praised for their charms, the craftsmanship deities are often forgotten and put apart from the rest of the other gods. But there are deities very close to the common people, as the common people are often producers of goods. The most obvious example in Dark Souls 1 will be Gwynevere, the Princess of Sunlight. She has obvious female fertility aspects, and she is a generous goddess of health, as we can see from spells from her school, like Bountiful Sunlight and Soothing Sunlight. She is beloved by many and is a symbol of Anor Londo's wealth and success. She is also married to a so-called god of flame, which makes her very similar to Venus and her husband Vulcan. But let's not forget the blacksmiths. They are not gods, but they are very important in Dark Souls. The giant blacksmith is from another race than the gods and men, but he seems to be immortal or maybe just long-lived. Andre of Astora is simply human, but he is pretty important in the story of Dark Souls, and he even appears in Dark Souls 3. Maybe he is immortal. The blacksmiths of Dark Souls seem to be put apart from society, just like the blacksmiths from Indo-European mythology. We can then construct this comparison table. I also have added the furtive pygmy and Manus, who could be the same being, since the furtive pygmy is the ancestor of mankind and Manus looks like an ape. Interestingly enough, Manus is the Latinized name for the ancestor deity of the Iron Age Germanic tribes. But let's not forget, perhaps the most important being in all religions of the world, the hero. The hero succeeds in numerous trials. In a story that we call the hero's journey, he never gives up during his trials, even though he is just human, but with divine powers. He is often the most revered by people, maybe not like the other gods, but in an unique way, as he is the main character of the most popular tales. The hero is more of an universal archetype rather than an Indo-European one, and not only for mythology but also literature. Examples include Cuchulainn of Irish mythology, Hercules, Odysseus and Aeneas of Greco-Roman myths and legends, also Gilgamesh of Babylonian and Sumerian legends. Let's not forget Luke Skywalker from a more recent tale, and finally the chosen undead from Dark Souls. Thank you for watching my video. I hope it was informative. My name is Gaisowiros, and see you next time.